as both a therapist and an English teacher as a second language, I can tell you that there's a lot of similarities between learning a language and healing. And this is what I see a lot in my students and in my client work. So, what is happening a lot of the times is that people think that they can think their way into being fluent in another language. And that goes exactly the same with the healing. People think that the more knowledge they have about healing, the more vocabulary around healing they have, the more they heal. Well, that is an illusion. In both cases, it is an illusion because it's simply an illusion of knowing. And the amount of times I had clients who will almost mistake really their knowing and their knowledge of the healing industry or therapeutic trends, because there are definitely therapeutic trends. So they know all of that from social media because that is easily accessible. It's literally almost now like an entertainment, and they think that they are healed or they are moving towards healing. That is a lot of the times it's an illusion of progression, because people are absolutely not embodying what they know. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that they know the attachment style, but they still withdraw from conflict or from confrontation. They still don't know how to set a boundary in real time with a real person that is actually now triggering them. They still react in the old way, but because they know so much, they think they trick. It's almost like the brain is tricking them, tricking quote unquote, that we know so much. And that is a lot of the times what I see in students, for example. What is happening, people almost like think, oh, I am, that there are different levels of learning language. So A1 is like that, the beginner level. So a lot of the times people who are actually on A1 level in terms of speaking and listening, which are the skills in language, when you can actually understand a native speaker and you can have a little bit of conversation with them on that, let's say A1 level, they mistake because they think that they A2. They think they A2 because they know the language, they know the grammar, they know the vocabulary. But when it comes to the real conversation, when I actually ask them like, oh, so what did you do at work? And if you just tell me about your routine in, present simple tense, they freezing. They don't know. They will ask me like, about how is this? And that is because their brain knows things but does not know how to put that knowing into practice in a real situation with the teacher, or even more so when with the teacher is sometimes not as stressful. Your English teacher or your therapist, to set a boundary, let's say with a therapist or something like that, is not as stressful as in real life situation. So that illusion of knowing is happening, everywhere. And unfortunately, that is happening even more so because we are introduced to new knowledge. We have access to knowledge all the time. I still remember the times when I was, for example, writing my MA. I had to go to the library. I would not be using ChatGPT for any of my essays. I would not be using, that much of internet. I would have to go actually to the library and physically acquire books to write essay about something, to write my BA, to write my MA, to meet the standards of my university. Yeah. So that is obviously very different now because, 20 years on, because I was finishing my degree in English philology around like 20 years ago, more or less. And the times obviously have changed. The technology has moved on. But with that, our access to knowledge has dramatically shifted. You don't have to go to the library. You can just like Google stuff. You can talk to chat. Yeah. So, and that gives you an illusion of progression, which is one of the biggest things that unfortunately a lot of people now struggle with, because they know a lot, but they cannot put that knowing into practice. Now, let's bring some neuroscience behind it, because once you understand that your brain has almost two different systems, there is one system that is definitely linked to you remembering information, to you, collecting and gathering knowledge, yes, but the other side of learning and the other side of your brain is performance. Performance under pressure, performance when sometimes stakes are high, performance when there is urgency, yes? And that goes to learning any skill, whether that is healing, whether that is playing the piano, whether that is, speaking a new language, whether that is driving a car, and that is remaining present whilst you're in conflict. So you are having maybe an argument with someone and you're staying present. Guys, this is an incredibly difficult skill to master, but a lot of the times what people are doing, they're not even listening to the other person whilst let's say they're having a confrontation. They already switching to the scripted stuff. They're not even seeing what's happening in front of them because their brain is already predicting the scenarios, usually the worst case scenario. So I want you to, remaining, let's say, present in conflict, which is one of the skills that you would acquire, let's say, in a therapeutic setting. To practice that, you have to practice a lot. You have to practice a lot and in different contexts. So not only, let's say, with your loved ones, but also in work, but also maybe in friendships, etc. Regulating your emotions while those emotions are high. Regulating and not switching to old reactions, to impulsive reactions. Again, this is building a muscle in your brain, and those skills, they depend on repeated experience, on repetition. So yes, and this is how the new neural pathways in your brain are built. So at some point your brain, so let's say my brain, a few years ago, many years ago, was predicting me to switch off during the conflict and for me to, let's say, be, subdued or something like that, yeah? And I would just, apologize for my existence, yeah? For my very existence, this is what I would do. But when I was practicing staying present in conflict, at some point now, for me, the automatic response is to listen to the other person, not treating the other person as a threat, but actually just as another human being with a different opinion. And sometimes still me sticking with the things that I need to actually say to them to hold whatever I gotta hold. And sometimes, maybe changing my opinion, depending on the context, depending on the circumstances, and depending on the situation. But that, to acquire that skill to remain present during conflict, that required from me a lot of practice and a lot of mistake making. Now, people will do everything a lot of the times to avoid making a mistake. That's why, again, insight feels good, because insight is very rewarding. You didn't practice anything, you didn't make any mistake, but you have insight, yeah? Now, practice is not a feel-good experience, because at the beginning you're going to be very incompetent in staying present, let's say, whilst you're in conflict. I was so incompetent being present, remaining present whilst in conflict, but with practice in different settings, I was able to acquire that skill and now, let's say, master that skill. So you have to really think about what sort of skills you specifically have to learn for you to heal, and then start thinking, okay, how do I practice that skill in real life? And sometimes we do need help with that, because sometimes sometimes a lot of the clients, and that goes again for students as well, people are so blinded to their natural strengths, they really don't know what's their natural forte. And that is it's such a blind spot, because not knowing your strength is a blind spot in itself. When you know your strength, that you're going to be able to naturally do things way easier in your life. The decision making will be way easier. Just, life is easier when you know your strength, but also when you know your blind spots. So when you know that certain patterns you do struggle with, and you need to learn how to sometimes master certain patterns, master certain skills to become more proficient in them. So only experience, a new experience, is able to actually change your brain. And this is what is really important. So it's almost like practice and new experience, as uncomfortable as it is, that is the only way for you to learn a new language, but also for you to heal. And if you need help with, let's say, an actual breakdown of the skills that you specifically need to practice to heal, you can book a session with me. Unfortunately, my students already booked up all the lessons, so I am not available for teaching English anymore, but I am definitely available for some sessions, which you can book in the links below. And like, share, and subscribe if that was helpful. And also, I'm going to see you in my next video. Bye bye.